Welcome to Darkverse, where the thin line between reality and nightmare fades into the shadows. I'm Isaac Nightshade, your guide into the eerie depths, where stories so unnerving will linger long after you turn away. These tales don't just chill the spine, they leave a mark on your soul. Tonight, we delve into the dark world of Craigslist horror stories, real-life encounters that will make you think twice before ever responding to that seemingly innocent ad. These are not just tales of odd meetups or bizarre listings. These are stories where trust was betrayed, where desperation turned dangerous, and where people thought they were getting a bargain, only to find themselves trapped in a nightmare. From roommates who hide far more than their intentions to strangers who lurk in the shadows, these stories reveal the true cost of seeking something online. As the lines between stranger and danger blur, one question remains. What would you do if your next Craigslist deal turned into your worst nightmare? So turn off the lights, lock the doors, and brace yourself for the spine-chilling truth behind these Craigslist horrors. If these tales of deception and terror grab hold of you, make sure to subscribe and become part of the Darkverse. Because in the dark, nothing is ever truly over. Let's begin. Story 1. The garden job that took a dark turn. I'd been searching for a way to make some extra cash over the summer. I had my eyes on a new graphic tablet, something to elevate my art and give me that edge I was craving. The problem was, my part-time job wasn't going to get me there fast enough. So, I turned to Craigslist, looking for something simple, nothing too complicated. That's when I saw it. A local ad looking for help with basic yard work. It seemed like the perfect fit. The ad was simple. Looking for someone to help clean up my garden, pull some weeds, cut some grass, trim the bushes. No experience needed, just reliability. Pay is decent for part-time work. Contact me at phone number. The picture attached was of a sprawling backyard, untamed and wild with a bit of a vintage charm to it. I immediately shot a message. I got a response later that day from a guy named Michael. He said he'd be happy to meet in person to discuss the job, but only at a local cafe near the center of town. No problem, I thought. I figured he just wanted to make sure I was serious. When we met, Michael seemed like a normal guy. Late 40s, casually dressed in a flannel shirt and jeans, calm voice, friendly enough. He said he had recently bought an old property on the edge of a quiet housing development right by the woods, and he wanted to clean up the backyard before deciding what to do with it. He even mentioned that if I could help him over the weekend, he'd throw in a bonus. I was sold. He gave me the address and told me to meet him Saturday morning. He warned me he might be a bit late, but I should go ahead and get started if I got there first. I was fine with that. It was a chance to make some extra money, and I'd get to enjoy the outdoors, so I hopped on my bike and rode out to the address. When I arrived, the area was eerily quiet. The neighborhood was old, with rows of spaced-out homes that looked a little rundown. Some were clearly abandoned, others only half lived in. There were no kids playing, no barking dogs, just the occasional rumble of trucks passing by, their engines sounding tired, as if they were hauling something heavy. It felt like the kind of place people moved to when they didn't want to be found. The house itself wasn't exactly abandoned, but it was definitely worn down. The lawn was overgrown and the garden beds were full of dry weeds. Some tools were leaning against the porch, rakes, hoes, shears. I assumed these were for me. Michael wasn't there yet, but he'd mentioned he might be running behind, so I just started working. The backyard was bigger than I expected. It stretched all the way to the tree line, and there was a small shed in the back, its door hanging off the hinges. The house was dark. No lights on inside, and all the windows had thick, dark curtains pulled shut. It looked like a place under renovation, nothing too alarming. I worked for about 20 minutes, raking leaves and pulling weeds around the porch. When I took a break to drink some water, I checked my phone. No messages from Michael. He still hadn't shown up. I shrugged and decided to keep going. I grabbed the push mower, which was leaning by the shed, and started cutting the grass. The mower kept catching on rocks and dry patches in the lawn, so I had to stop frequently to pull it free. I had my headphones in, listening to music, trying to block out the heat and the frustration of the mower not working properly. At one point, I paused the music. There was this strange feeling, a sensation that something wasn't quite right. It wasn't a sound exactly. It was more like the absence of sound. Everything had gone unnervingly quiet. I shrugged it off as nothing. Maybe I was just being weird. I kept mowing, pushing myself to finish before the sun went down. But then I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement in one of the upstairs windows. The second floor had two visible windows facing the yard, both covered by heavy curtains. I could have sworn I saw a figure in one of them, a slight shift, like someone stepping back from the window. It was quick, barely a flash, but I distinctly saw something. I stared at the window for a moment, but the figure didn't return. I told myself it was nothing, probably just the wind or the light playing tricks. Michael had said the house was empty, but maybe he had sent someone else over to check in. I went back to work, trying to ignore the unsettling feeling that settled in my chest. About 30 minutes later, I stopped to catch my breath. I looked up again, almost without thinking. That's when I saw it. The silhouette of a figure standing still in the window. Not a shadow passing by, but a distinct shape. Someone standing perfectly still, just watching me. I froze. The figure didn't move. It was there, staring down at me, and then, after about 10 seconds, it was gone. I pulled my phone out and checked for a message from Michael. Nothing. I felt uneasy but didn't know what to do. I thought about calling, but I didn't want to look paranoid. Maybe it was someone Michael knew or a friend stopping by. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. As the afternoon wore on, I tried to push the feeling away, focusing on my work. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the yard. I had about an hour left before it got too dark, so I kept going, trimming the hedges along the side of the house. The back of the yard dipped into shade, which I didn't like. It felt colder back there, and the trees seemed to tower over me, their branches stretching toward the sky like fingers reaching out. I glanced at the upstairs window. The curtains were still drawn. No movement, no sign of anyone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The breeze shifted, light but cold, and I turned to face the house again. The curtain in the second floor window swayed. It didn't move slowly like it had before. This time it jerked as if someone had shoved it hard from inside. Then, just as suddenly, it dropped back into place as if nothing had happened. My heart raced. I tried to finish the work as quickly as I could. I didn't want to be there after dark, and every second that passed made me feel more uneasy. I moved around the yard, collecting branches and bagging leaves, all while trying not to look at the house. But then I saw him again. Not in the house, but in the woods. I was near the fence at the back of the yard, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move between the trees. A figure standing completely still about 30 feet away, just watching me. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew he was watching me on purpose, testing me, seeing what I'd do. I couldn't breathe. I didn't know if I should run, or if I should act like everything was normal. I stood there for a moment, unsure, before I slowly walked back toward the front of the yard. I didn't want to seem scared, but I knew something was wrong. When I got to my bike, I checked the back seat and locked the doors the second I was inside. My hands were shaking as I started the engine. I didn't look behind me, but I couldn't stop glancing at the rearview mirror. I was certain I was being followed, even though I didn't see anyone. The road was empty. When I got home, I texted Michael, telling him I wouldn't be coming back. He didn't respond. That was strange. He'd always replied quickly before. Days passed and still no word, no response to my message. I tried not to think about it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been close to something far darker than I'd realized, something that didn't want to be found. Weeks later, I found the listing for the property had been removed. I don't know who was inside that house or who was in the woods. Maybe it was the same person, maybe not, but I never went back, and I never will. Story 2. The Urgent Roommate Who Had No ID. I'd been living in my apartment for a couple of years, and after my last roommate moved out, I figured it was time to find someone new. Rent was eating up a good chunk of my paycheck, and the second room had been sitting empty for months, just gathering dust. The idea of filling it with a new roommate seemed like the logical move, so I posted a simple listing on Craigslist. Nothing fancy, just a basic description of the room and a couple of photos. I included the rent, utilities, and my contact details. It wasn't long before I received a message from a guy named Chris. He seemed normal enough, around my age, polite, and not too talkative. He said he was moving to the area for a new job and was looking for a place urgently. His message was straightforward. He needed a room as soon as possible. We exchanged a few more messages, and he seemed decent. No red flags. He said he'd be able to meet the same day, which struck me as a bit hasty, but I was in a hurry to get someone in, so I agreed. I gave him my address, and we planned to meet that evening. Chris showed up at the entrance of my building just as we'd agreed. He was wearing a black hoodie and jeans and carried just one backpack. No suitcases, no bags, just the one. He looked kind of scruffy but not unkempt, just off, but I didn't think much of it. He introduced himself, and his smile seemed genuine enough, though his eyes seemed to dart around the hallway a little too quickly. I let it slide. He said he was from a different city, just getting his footing here. We went upstairs, and I showed him the room. I tried to keep it casual. The room was a bit small, but I figured it would be fine for him. He looked around, nodded, and said it would do. I asked about the deposit and ID, but he simply smiled and said, "I don't have anything on me now, but I'll sort it out tomorrow. I can send you something." Again, I didn't press the issue. He seemed calm and collected, and I thought maybe he just didn't have it with him yet. The first few days after he moved in were fine, I guess. He didn't talk much, kept mostly to himself, but he was polite enough. He spent a lot of time in his room, occasionally coming out to use the kitchen or watch TV in the living room. He'd say he was applying for jobs, looking online for work. I didn't think anything of it. Everyone's been there, right? Trying to find that perfect job and struggling a bit. But then things started to feel strange. It was the late night noises that first started to get to me. Around 1 or 2 a.m., I'd hear voices coming from the kitchen. Not whispers. No, these were loud voices, like two people were having a full conversation. It didn't sound like a phone call, but like they were actually in the kitchen, talking to each other, laughing, drinking. At first, I thought I was just hearing things or maybe dreaming. But then it happened again the next night. I was too tired to deal with it, but the next morning I asked Chris about it casually. I said, "Hey, could you keep the noise down late at night? I could hear you talking in the kitchen." He looked surprised, like he didn't even realize it was that loud. He apologized quickly, saying it wouldn't happen again. But 2 nights later it did, and again the night after that. It was like a slow drip of oddities that just didn't add up. It was always around the same time, the same voices, sometimes more than one person. I started locking my bedroom door at night because I didn't feel comfortable anymore. I didn't know what was happening, but it was definitely affecting my sleep. Things escalated a couple of nights later. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of whispering right outside my bedroom door. It wasn't loud, but it was clear enough. And then I heard something else, a soft rattle of the doorknob. Someone was trying to open the door. My heart skipped a beat. I was frozen, listening, waiting, my mind racing. Was someone in my apartment? Was Chris having people over again? It didn't seem right. This wasn't just a late-night hangout. I stayed as quiet as I could, holding my breath. The footsteps outside the door stopped. The whispering continued for a few more seconds before it stopped too. The silence was so intense I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. I waited for what felt like forever before I dared to move. I didn't open the door. I just lay there thinking, my mind running through all the scenarios. My gut told me something wasn't right. Something was off with Chris, with the people he was hanging out with, and now with what was happening outside my door. The next morning, I did a quick check of my room. I checked the drawers where I kept some of my valuables. I kept some emergency cash in a locked drawer, and when I opened it, I noticed one of the envelopes felt thinner than usual. I took out the contents and immediately realized that a few $100s were missing. I didn't need to double check. I knew exactly how much was in there the night before. I kept track of it. I had counted it a few days earlier, but now it was gone. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I couldn't prove it was him, but there was no one else it could have been. I didn't want to accuse him outright without evidence, but this was getting too weird. I decided to confront him. I had to know the truth. When he came into the living room that evening, I took a deep breath and said, "Look, Chris, I don't want to make things uncomfortable, but I noticed some money went missing from my room. I don't know what happened, but I need to know if you took it or if someone else did." At first, he didn't react. He just stared at me, his face frozen in place. Then all at once, his face twisted into a snarl. He yelled, "What are you accusing me of? You think I'm a thief?" He started pacing back and forth, muttering curses under his breath. His eyes were wide, frantic, like a switch had flipped in his mind. I stood there, feeling more uncomfortable than ever. The air in the room was thick with tension. And then he threw something at me, his phone. "I don't need this. I've been nothing but good to you," he screamed. "You don't trust me. You think you can kick me out. Who the hell do you think you are?" I stepped back, taken aback by his sudden aggression. His eyes were wild. It was like I didn't even know the person in front of me anymore. That's when I realized he hadn't just been quiet. He'd been hiding something. He wasn't who he said he was, and the threats he was throwing at me made it clear he wasn't going to just leave quietly. I knew I had to act fast. This wasn't just about the money, it was about my safety. I immediately walked out onto the landing, locked the door behind me, and called the police from outside. My hands were shaking, but I kept it together. I didn't want to go back inside. I didn't want to give him the chance to do something else. The police arrived about 20 minutes later. By that time, I had stayed out in the stairwell, listening, waiting. When they knocked on the door, Chris was sitting in the living room, pretending everything was fine. But he didn't deny anything. He just got louder, throwing insults at the officers. The younger officer warned him that he didn't have any rights in the apartment and that if I wanted him out, he'd have to leave. After some resistance, Chris reluctantly packed up his stuff. He just had the one backpack, no other belongings. As the officers escorted him out of the building, he muttered threats under his breath. "You're going to regret this," he said. "You'll see, I'll be back." The officers told me to change my locks and keep my phone closed. I did, but even after they left, I still felt on edge. For weeks, I didn't hear from Chris again. He never came back and I never saw him. But the whole experience made me question everything I thought I knew about people. How easily someone could lie, manipulate, and creep into your life. How quickly they could flip a situation from seemingly normal to terrifying. I made a promise to myself after that. I'd never let someone in again without knowing exactly who they were. I don't care how friendly they seem, how desperate they act. Trust has to be earned, not just handed over. That was the last time I ever let someone move in without doing a proper background check. Story 3. The free couch that wasn't what it seemed. When I moved into my new apartment, I was excited but also pinching pennies. I didn't want to spend a ton of money furnishing the place, so I started browsing Craigslist for deals. Furniture can get expensive, especially when you're starting from scratch, but I figured I'd be able to find something decent at a good price. One night, after scrolling through page after page of listings, I saw something that caught my eye, a nearly new couch, free for pickup. The ad said it was a modern design, dark gray, practically spotless, and it was free because the couple who owned it was relocating urgently. That sounded like an offer I couldn't refuse. I shot a message to the guy asking if the couch was still available. Within minutes, I got a reply. "Yes, it's still here. Come by tonight and pick it up. It's in great condition. Just need it gone ASAP." The message was brief but to the point, seemed reasonable. I asked for the address and he sent it over along with a note that said, "Please bring someone to help carry it as it's too heavy for one person." I didn't have anyone available on short notice, but he replied quickly, saying, "No worries, I'll help you load it. See you in an hour." The excitement of getting a free couch had me thinking about how nice the living room would look with it in place. I drove over to the address, which was about 30 minutes away. It was a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind that felt calm and peaceful, especially as dusk was beginning to settle in. I arrived just after 7, the street mostly empty with just a few cars scattered here and there. The house itself was an older one but well kept, with a beige exterior and brown trim. It had that typical suburban feel, neat, orderly, and peaceful. When I rang the doorbell, a short man in his 40s answered. He had thinning hair, wearing a plain zip-up hoodie and jeans. He introduced himself as Michael, the neighbor of the couple who was giving away the couch. He said the couple had just stepped out to run an errand and left him in charge to show me the couch. Something about him seemed off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. He had an uneasy energy, like he was constantly glancing over his shoulder, checking something in the house. But I brushed it off, thinking maybe he was just socially awkward. The whole moving for a new job scenario seemed fine. I followed him inside and immediately I noticed something odd. The house was incredibly empty. There was no furniture in the living room, no rugs, no pictures on the walls, nothing. The house felt like a place that had been vacated long ago. The air was stale and the floor creaked under my feet, adding to the eeriness of it all. We walked down a short hallway to a dark room on the right. The only light was from a small window with the blinds drawn. As I pulled out my phone to use the flashlight, I saw the room had absolutely no furniture at all, not even the couch that was supposed to be there. Instead, there were a few empty cardboard boxes in one corner and some tangled electrical cords on the floor. I turned to Michael, confused. "Where's the couch?" He looked at me like I had caught him off guard. His eyes darted around the room for a second before he replied, "Oh, yeah. They changed the plan last minute. The couch is actually at the back of the house. They'll be bringing it in any minute now." I didn't buy it. It didn't make sense. The whole room had an odd, empty feel to it, and Michael's behavior was becoming increasingly strange. His voice was jittery, and he kept looking over his shoulder. I tried to stay calm. Maybe there was a simple explanation for it, I thought. But that was when he started asking questions that seemed out of place for a simple furniture exchange. "Do you live alone?" he asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. I thought it was odd, but I answered, "Yeah, I live by myself." He nodded like he was filing the answer away. Then he asked, "What do you do for work? Are you local?" I gave him short answers, but the questions kept coming. How much I paid in rent, if I had any family nearby, if I had a car. It was the kind of small talk that felt too focused, too personal. "I think I'll just come back later when the owners are here," I said, trying to distance myself from the increasingly uncomfortable situation. But Michael didn't seem eager to let me leave. He just stood there, blocking the doorway slightly, as if he wasn't ready for me to go. I felt trapped in a house that wasn't mine. Something in my gut told me that something was very wrong here. "I'll go check on the couch then," I said, trying to edge past him. But just before I could make it out of the hallway, I saw something that made my heart stop. There, just next to the door frame, was a faint handprint on the wall. It wasn't a decorative mark. It was a smudge, like someone had braced themselves against the wall, maybe after falling or trying to steady themselves. The handprint was smeared, almost as if it had been made in a hurry. I froze, staring at it. Michael seemed to notice my gaze and immediately rushed to explain. "Oh, it's just the paintwork. They were repainting that room. Got messy." I didn't say anything. I just nodded slowly and took a few steps backward, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. When I reached the front door, I reached for the handle, but Michael moved ahead and unlocked it himself. I didn't even think twice about it. I just walked outside quickly, the unease creeping up my spine. But then, as I stepped off the porch and began walking toward my car, I felt him behind me. Not in a threatening way at first, but in a way that felt predatory. He was just a few steps behind me, too close for comfort. Then his voice changed. "Look, man, I need some money," he said quickly, his tone almost desperate. "Maybe we can make a deal." I turned around slowly, heart pounding. "What kind of deal?" I asked, not trusting my own voice. He stepped closer, now blocking my path slightly. "You came all the way here, spent your time. I got stressed out. Can't just let you go empty-handed. You gotta pay for my time. You owe me." I felt my chest tighten. This wasn't the exchange I had in mind. I started to back away slowly, trying to keep my cool. "I don't have anything for you," I said, my voice shaking. "I came here for a couch, not a deal." He didn't like that answer. His expression hardened, and I could see the anger in his eyes now. "You think you're just going to leave like that?" he growled. "You wasted my time, now you're going to pay for it." Suddenly, I realized what was happening. This wasn't about a couch. It wasn't about a simple transaction. This was a setup. I didn't wait for him to say anything else. I spun around quickly, breaking into a sprint for my car. I could hear him behind me, yelling something, but I didn't look back. I had to get out of there. I reached my car, jumped in, and slammed the door shut. The second I started the engine, I glanced at my rear-view mirror. He hadn't followed, at least not outside the house. My heart was pounding as I drove away, my mind racing. I kept checking the rear-view mirror every few seconds, expecting to see his headlights behind me, but there was nothing. I was shaken. I realized in that moment how easily someone could manipulate a situation, how simple it was to lure someone into a trap. All of it, the handprint, the strange behavior, the vague details in the ad, was carefully planned. When I got home, I immediately looked up the listing again. It had already been taken down. The profile had been deleted, but the conversation history was still there. I scrolled through the messages, and when I clicked on his profile, it said, "User not found." I blocked the account and deleted everything, but the feeling of unease didn't leave. That guy hadn't just wanted to get rid of a couch. He wanted something much worse. Now I don't pick up anything free online unless it's in a public space, parking lots, shopping malls, well-lit areas. I learned that lesson the hard way. And every time I see a free stuff, listing or someone offering a couch for free, I remember that empty room, that handprint on the wall, and the man who thought he could take advantage of me. Story 4. The TV that came with a price. It was supposed to be a simple transaction. I had been eyeing a newer, affordable TV for a while, since my old clunky flat screen had given me nothing but trouble. I was tired of the static on the screen and the HDMI ports barely working anymore. After a few weeks of searching, I found a listing on Craigslist that seemed perfect. A 3-year-old Samsung model, in good condition and reasonably priced. It was a deal I couldn't pass up. The seller, a guy named Joshua, replied quickly to my message. We exchanged a few texts, and he seemed like a typical guy, polite, to the point, no weird messages or red flags. He said he was upgrading to a newer model and was getting rid of the old one. Perfect. We set up a time for me to meet him. It would be after work around 7:30 p.m. That was fine. I didn't mind driving a bit as long as I could get the TV I needed. Joshua's messages were clear and straightforward. He'd be at the house, and I could pick up the TV in person, make the exchange, and head home. Simple enough. The address he gave me was in an older neighborhood, the kind of place where everything seemed quiet and still. The kind of neighborhood that looked a little out of place at night, empty streets, dim streetlights, and houses that all seemed to fade into the shadows. But it didn't make me nervous. I thought about how I needed that TV and how much better it would be for my movie nights. So I drove there. The place was a single-story brick house with a small front yard. No porch lights were on, and the lawn was a bit overgrown. A little rundown, sure, but nothing that raised an immediate red flag. As I pulled up, I noticed a car parked outside, a silver sedan. It was the only car on the street, which made the whole situation feel a little eerie, but I figured it was just the usual quiet of the neighborhood. I texted Joshua when I got there. "I'm here, where should I park?" A minute later, I saw movement through the window. A tall figure with broad shoulders walked past, and I was certain it was him. But then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Joshua. "Sorry, I'm running late. Be there in about 10 minutes. I was confused. I had clearly seen someone moving inside the house, and the timing didn't add up. But trying not to overthink it, I waited in my car for a few more minutes, glancing at the front door. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Minutes passed and the house remained dark. No lights, no movement. I decided to get out of the car and knock on the door. I approached the house cautiously. As I stepped up onto the porch, the boards creaked under my feet. I knocked twice, then waited. Silence. I knocked harder, louder this time, trying to get someone's attention. No answer. I looked at my phone again, and finally another text came in. "Sorry, traffic, be there in 5. The sudden shift in the timeline felt weird to me. First, it was 10 minutes, then 5. I quickly checked the traffic on my Maps app. Nothing. The streets around here were clear. This didn't feel like a simple delay. I knocked again, a little louder this time, and then I noticed something strange. The door, although scratched and old, had a peephole, but no one came to answer. This was the moment I started to feel uncomfortable. Something about the silence in the house, the lack of movement from the inside, it just felt off. I stood there for a moment longer, staring at the door. The street was empty. No cars passed by. No lights flickered on in the houses nearby. It felt like the whole neighborhood had fallen asleep. I got back in my car, locked the doors, and sat there for a minute trying to calm myself down. My phone buzzed again. "Sorry, just a few minutes. We can do this, right?" I replied. "Sure, just come to the door when you're ready." I wasn't sure why I said that. The truth was, I was starting to regret this whole thing, but I pushed it aside. After all, I was already here. A few more minutes and I could be on my way. When Joshua showed up, he came walking quickly down the driveway. He looked like he had been rushing. His face was flushed, like he was out of breath, but he smiled and greeted me. He was shorter than I'd imagined from the texts, but his energy was calm, almost too calm. I wasn't sure what it was, but there was something unnerving about the way he acted. He led me inside the house, which looked even emptier than it did outside. There was hardly anything in the living room. The walls were bare, the floors clean but completely empty. It felt as though no one had been living there for a while. "We'll just get the TV and load it up," he said, walking past me toward the back room. I followed him down a short hallway, where the silence seemed to grow thicker. He stopped in front of a dark room with no lights on, and the blinds were drawn. There was no furniture, just a few cardboard boxes piled in the corner and some random electrical cords scattered across the floor. I felt a pang of doubt deep in my chest. "Wait, where's the TV?" I asked. Joshua's expression faltered for a moment. His eyes darted around the room like he was looking for an explanation. "Oh, yeah, it's actually in the back storage room. I must have forgotten." I wasn't buying it. I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty room, unsure of what to do. Something didn't feel right. Joshua must have sensed my hesitation because he turned back to face me, smiling awkwardly. "Don't worry, it's fine. It's just a bit of a mess right now. I'll go grab it." I stayed still for a moment, staring at the dark hallway, trying to calm myself down. It was a simple transaction. He was just selling a TV, right? But my mind was racing. He came back quickly, carrying the TV. The whole time he kept talking, asking me questions about where I lived, if I lived alone, and what I did for work. The questions felt too personal, and every answer I gave seemed to make him more interested. Finally, I took the TV and walked toward the front door, keeping my distance. But as I got to the porch, I glanced back and saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a shadow in one of the windows, someone moving behind the curtains watching me. I froze in place, staring at the window. The shadow didn't move, but the hair on the back of my neck stood up. Joshua was already out the door, waiting by his car. I didn't want to seem paranoid, but that feeling lingered. The shadow, someone else, was in the house. I couldn't explain why, but I felt trapped. As I got into my car and drove off, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't just dealing with a guy selling an old TV. Something was very wrong here. I kept checking my mirrors, wondering if I was being followed, but when I glanced at the rearview mirror, nothing seemed unusual. It wasn't until I got home and checked the listing again that I realized just how wrong everything had gone. The ad had already been deleted, and when I looked up Joshua's profile, it read, "User not found." I'm not sure what happened at that house. Maybe it was a scam, maybe it was something worse, but I never went back to that neighborhood, and I haven't bought anything off Craigslist since. If I learned anything from that night, it's that some deals come with a hidden cost, one that doesn't show up until it's too late. Story 5. The Stranger Who Was Too Interested. I was in the middle of a stressful month when I decided to take a break. Work was consuming my life, and I had no time for anything else. So, in the midst of my routine, I thought it would be nice to have a small distraction. I needed a new couch. My old one was on its last legs, and it wasn't the most comfortable piece of furniture anyway. I thought Craigslist would be a good place to look for something affordable. I scrolled through the listings when I came across one that seemed perfect. A couch, barely used, dark gray, modern design, with a great price attached. The ad said the couple who was giving it away had just moved and didn't have room for it in their new place. They promised it was in excellent condition. Without hesitation, I texted the number listed. The response came within minutes. The person on the other end, Paul, seemed friendly enough. He told me I could come pick it up the same day and just to bring someone with me to help carry it. Since I didn't have anyone available at the time, he reassured me that he'd be there to help me load it into my car. He gave me the address, about a 30-minute drive into a suburban neighborhood I wasn't familiar with. It seemed a bit quiet, but it wasn't too far from my place, so I figured it was fine. He told me to come by in the evening around 6:00 p.m. when he expected to be home. I agreed and made plans to leave right after work. When I arrived at the address, the neighborhood looked quiet, like something out of a movie. The houses were mostly single-story with neat lawns and small porches. The streets were almost empty. Only a couple of cars were parked along the curb, but they weren't close to the house I was visiting. The home itself was older, with a worn-down charm, nothing out of the ordinary. I parked on the street and sent a text saying I had arrived. About 5 minutes later, Paul responded with, "I'm outside." I glanced toward the front porch where I saw a man standing there, waving. He was short, maybe in his early 40s, with thinning hair and a hoodie on. His smile seemed genuine, but his eyes were a little too intense for my liking, but I chalked it up to my nerves. He waved me up to the porch. "Hey, I'm Paul. Glad you could make it," he said, still smiling. He looked eager to show me the couch, but something about his enthusiasm made me uneasy. I wasn't sure what it was, but I tried to brush it off. He opened the door and led me inside. The house was quieter than I expected. The living room was practically empty except for the couch. There was no clutter, no personal items, and there was a strange, musty smell in the air. The floors creaked underfoot, and it felt like the house hadn't been lived in for some time. My mind started racing, wondering if maybe they were moving out for good and just hadn't had time to pack up. "Right this way," Paul said, leading me further inside. The kitchen was dark, no lights on, and the room had that stale feeling to it. I paused, standing in the doorway, waiting for him to gesture toward the couch. Paul, seemingly oblivious to my hesitation, led me past the kitchen and into a hallway. He stopped at a room at the end of it. "It's right here," he said, opening the door. I walked into the room and my stomach dropped. The place was empty, no couch, no furniture of any kind. The floor was bare except for a few cardboard boxes. There was no couch at all. I turned to Paul, my confusion growing. "Where's the couch?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. Paul's eyes darted around the room, clearly caught off guard. "Oh, right," he stammered. "The couch. It's in the garage. I'll grab it in just a sec." He smiled again, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Okay," I said, trying to stay calm. Maybe it was a simple mistake. I followed him back down the hallway, trying not to let my discomfort show. But something didn't sit right with me. The house was too quiet, too empty. He led me into the garage, which was much darker than the rest of the house. The door creaked as he opened it. The garage smelled musty and damp, and the only thing inside was a rusted old car covered in dust. No sign of a couch anywhere. I froze. "Paul, I don't think I'm comfortable with this," I said, taking a step back. Paul turned to face me, his smile now gone. "It's really not a big deal," he said, his voice lowering. "We can make this work. I just need a little time." My mind was racing. What was going on? Why wasn't he showing me the couch? Why had he brought me into the house when it was clear no one was living there? "Look, I think I should go," I said, my voice shaking more now. "I don't feel comfortable anymore." Paul stepped closer. "You can't just leave," he said, his tone becoming more forceful. "You came all this way. You should at least compensate me for my time." Something in the air changed. It wasn't just a casual conversation anymore. The tension between us felt thick, like I could feel the walls closing in. I started backing away, trying to get to the door, but he blocked my path. His eyes narrowed. "You came all this way. Don't waste my time." His voice was no longer calm. It was aggressive, like a warning. My heart was pounding in my chest, and all my instincts were telling me to get out of there. I turned quickly, bolting toward the door. As I rushed past him, I heard his footsteps behind me, a little too close. I grabbed the doorknob, nearly yanking it off, and ran out onto the porch. My hand was trembling as I fumbled for my keys, but I managed to get in my car and lock the door. I slammed it into reverse and sped off without looking back. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me the entire time, standing in the doorway. As I drove away, I kept checking my rearview mirror, but there was no sign of him following. Still, I couldn't relax. The whole drive home, I thought about the empty house, the strange behavior, and the way Paul had tried to trap me in that garage. If I had stayed a few minutes longer, would I have been stuck there? Would he have locked the door? What if I hadn't made it to my car in time? The next day, I went back to check the listing on Craigslist. The ad was gone, deleted as if it had never existed. The profile didn't even show up anymore. It was like I had imagined the entire encounter. I couldn't shake the feeling that something much darker had been waiting for me at that house. Maybe Paul wasn't who he claimed to be. Maybe he wasn't even selling a couch at all. I don't know. But I knew one thing for sure. I wouldn't be going near that neighborhood again. From now on, I would always trust my instincts. I wouldn't go into an unfamiliar house, no matter how harmless the ad seemed. Because sometimes, the scariest things aren't the ones that happen in the dark. They're the things that happen when you let your guard down. Story 6. The free couch that wasn't so free. It all started with an ad. The kind of ad you see every day on Craigslist. A couple was moving out of town and they needed to offload some furniture. A nearly new couch, dark blue, modern, and in perfect condition, was listed for free. All they wanted was for someone to come pick it up, no strings attached. It sounded like the perfect deal. I had recently moved into a small apartment and my old couch had seen better days. I clicked on the listing immediately. The ad had only been posted a couple of hours ago, and I figured I'd be one of the first to respond. The couple was relocating for work, and they wanted the couch gone by the end of the weekend. Perfect timing. I messaged the number listed and got a reply within minutes. The person on the other end, who introduced himself as Jason, told me that the couch was still available and that I could come pick it up later that evening. I was in no rush, but I didn't want to miss out on this deal. After a brief exchange, I agreed to meet him at 7:00 p.m. He gave me an address in a quiet suburban neighborhood on the edge of town. The place wasn't too far, so I figured it was fine. When I arrived, the house seemed ordinary, tucked between two others in a residential area, but something about the place felt off. The porch was cluttered with old boxes and bags, some clearly stacked haphazardly as though someone was in the process of moving out. There were no lights on in the house, and the place had an eerie stillness to it. It was as if no one had lived there for a while, and yet there was the couch, advertised as in perfect condition, waiting for me. I texted Jason to let him know I was there. He replied instantly, "I'm in the backyard, come on around." A little weird, but not a huge red flag. I walked around the side of the house, passing by some shrubs that had overgrown, giving the place a disheveled, almost abandoned look. As I turned the corner, I saw him standing near the back porch, a man in his late 30s, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans. He was holding a beer in his hand, his face flushed. "Hey, you made it," he said, smiling widely. His teeth were slightly yellowed and the smile didn't seem to reach his eyes, but I figured it was just me being paranoid. He seemed harmless enough. "Yeah, thanks," I said, holding up the cash I had brought just in case we needed to negotiate. "So, where's the couch?" Jason gestured towards the porch. "Right there," he said. "Just grab it and we'll be good to go." As I looked toward the porch, though, my stomach sank. There was no couch, no furniture. The area was completely empty except for a couple of empty beer cans and some broken garden tools. It wasn't even the kind of space you'd put a couch in. I don't see it," I said, confused. Jason chuckled almost nervously. "Oh yeah, it's actually inside. Just, let me grab it for you. We're just moving a few things around." I didn't know what to think, but I was already here. I had driven all this way, and I didn't want to seem rude. I followed him into the house, still not entirely sure what was going on. The interior was eerily quiet, and it had that musty smell of a place that hadn't been lived in for a while. No lights were on, and the air felt heavy, almost oppressive. It didn't look like a place where people had recently moved out. "Where's the couch?" I asked again, starting to feel more and more uneasy. Jason led me down a narrow hallway, the floorboards creaking under our weight. As we reached the end, he opened a door to what looked like an old bedroom. I immediately noticed the lack of furniture. There was nothing inside except for a mattress on the floor, stained and torn. Yeah, Jason said, scratching his head. "It's in here somewhere. I just need to clear a bit of space first." The door was half open, but the room inside felt too dark. I could barely see anything. Something felt completely wrong. "I think I should go," I said, my voice shaking a little now. I had that familiar feeling, the one where you know something is about to go terribly wrong, but you don't know what. Jason stopped moving and turned to face me. His smile had disappeared, replaced by a strange, cold stare. "Come on, don't leave now," he said, his voice low. "You've already come this far." I took a step back, my hand instinctively reaching for my phone in my pocket. My heart was beating faster now, and I felt the panic rising in my chest. "I'm really sorry," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I think I should go." Before I could turn, he was right in front of me, blocking my path. "You're not leaving," he said, his tone suddenly menacing. "Not without the couch." I froze, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. My mind raced. What was I dealing with? What was his game here? The door to the room was still ajar, and I could feel the oppressive silence closing in on me. "I don't want any trouble," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm leaving." Jason didn't say anything. His eyes glinted with something darker now, and his body language shifted. He was no longer the friendly guy I'd met in the texts. This person standing in front of me was someone else. I needed to get out of there. I shoved past him, sprinting for the front door. My heart was pounding in my ears, and I could hear his heavy footsteps behind me, getting closer. I reached the door, but as my hand grasped the handle, I heard him yell, "You're not leaving yet." Without thinking, I yanked open the door, bolted outside, and sprinted toward my car. I didn't even look back. I could hear Jason shouting from behind me, but I didn't care. I wasn't about to stop. I threw open my car door, jumped in, and locked it as fast as I could. I didn't even bother to check if he was still chasing me. I started the engine, slammed it into reverse, and sped off down the quiet street, my hands shaking uncontrollably. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had been waiting for me inside that house. If I had stayed just a minute longer, would I have found out what it was? What had Jason been hiding? And why was he so insistent on keeping me there? The next day, I tried to forget about the whole experience, but the fear kept gnawing at me. I checked Craigslist again, just to make sure the ad had been deleted. It was gone. No listing, no contact information, nothing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it hadn't been a coincidence. I drove by the house a few days later just to see if it looked normal. There was no sign of Jason, and the house looked just as abandoned as I had remembered. But my stomach twisted as I glanced toward the front door. It was slightly ajar, like someone had just left in a hurry. I left the area quickly, vowing never to return. And so I learned a valuable lesson. Some things really are too good to be true. You can't trust every ad you see, no matter how tempting it seems. From now on, I'll stick to the safer side of life. No more random Craigslist meetups, because next time I might not be so lucky. Story 7. The job that wasn't what it seemed. I've always been someone who needs a little extra cash on the side. It's just how things go when you're living paycheck to paycheck and trying to make ends meet. A couple of years ago, I was looking for anything I could do after work. That's when I stumbled across a Craigslist listing that seemed perfect. The ad read, "Need help organizing my garage and basement. Must be good with heavy lifting. $100 for a few hours of work." The pay seemed decent, especially for a few hours of work. No experience necessary. Perfect. I messaged the number listed, eager to get back into my routine of paying off debt, and within minutes I received a response. The person, who introduced himself as Tom, said he was looking for someone to help clear out some boxes from his garage. He had recently moved into a new home, and he was struggling to organize everything. We agreed to meet that afternoon, and he gave me the address. It was in a quiet, well-kept neighborhood just outside the city. A bit of a drive, but nothing I couldn't handle. When I pulled up to the house, it was exactly what I had expected. A nice, clean suburban home. It looked like a place where a middle-aged man might live with his family. The yard was well manicured, the mailbox was pristine, and there was even a large garage in the back, filled with boxes just like he had described. I rang the doorbell, and Tom opened the door almost immediately. He was a thin man in his 40s, wearing a faded t-shirt and jeans, a little sweat dotting his forehead as if he had just come in from doing something physically demanding. "Hey there, thanks for coming," he said, offering me a tight smile. "I just need a little help moving these boxes into the basement, nothing too strenuous. Should only take a couple of hours." I stepped inside and followed him through the house. It was quiet, too quiet, and the decor was sparse, almost too sparse. There were no family pictures, no artwork on the walls, just plain white walls and dark wood floors. It gave the place an unsettling, almost clinical feel, like someone had just moved in but never fully settled. We walked through the kitchen and into the hallway, where Tom led me to the basement door. He opened it, and a cold gust of air rushed out. I couldn't help but notice the faint smell of mildew, but it didn't seem too bad. "Here's the space," Tom said, his voice oddly cheerful. He gestured toward the stacks of boxes piled up at the far end of the room. "It's just a matter of moving these into the storage area, just some seasonal stuff, some old furniture. Shouldn't take long." I nodded and grabbed one of the smaller boxes, testing its weight. It wasn't too heavy, just awkward to carry. I started moving it over to the storage area on the far side of the basement. As I moved more boxes, I began to notice something strange. The basement wasn't just a normal basement with boxes stacked haphazardly. The walls were lined with shelves, filled with what seemed like odd items. Old lamps, various tools, strange electronics, things that didn't seem to belong in a normal household. I made my way back to the pile of boxes, but this time, as I reached for a heavier one, I heard something behind me, a faint sound like someone was shifting their weight in the shadows. I froze, my heart starting to race. I turned around, expecting to see Tom standing behind me, but no one was there. "Hey, you okay?" Tom's voice echoed down the stairs, making me jump. "You're getting kind of quiet over there." "Yeah, I'm fine," I called back, trying to sound normal. "Just a little tired." I didn't want to seem paranoid, but the basement suddenly felt too big, too empty. It felt like I was alone in a room full of things I didn't recognize. I tried to shake it off, but the unease only grew the longer I stayed down there. The sound of the footsteps had been so faint, like someone else was lurking in the shadows. After a few more trips back and forth, I was starting to feel increasingly uncomfortable. The basement seemed to stretch on forever, and with every box I moved, I noticed more strange things. A stack of old newspapers from the 90s, a large, cracked mirror propped against the wall, boxes filled with what appeared to be old, rusted medical supplies. Suddenly, I felt a sharp, cold draft brush against my skin. I looked up, and to my horror, I saw that the door at the other end of the basement had cracked open. The wind outside had kicked up, but the door shouldn't have been open. I froze. "Hey, Tom," I called, my voice wavering. "The door, is that supposed to be open?" I didn't hear a response. I walked over cautiously, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. The door was barely open, just enough to let in a sliver of dim light from the outside. I peered through the crack but saw nothing, just the pitch black of the yard beyond. I was about to close the door when I heard something behind me, a low, guttural sound, a moan. I whipped around, and that's when I saw it. A figure, pale and gaunt, standing in the far corner of the basement. It looked like a person, but their features were twisted like they had been pulled from some nightmare. Their skin was pale as bone, stretched tight over a thin, emaciated frame. My blood ran cold. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The figure just stood there, staring at me, unmoving. "Hey, you all right?" Tom's voice broke through my paralysis. I could hear him walking toward me now. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I turned toward him, not knowing what to say. The figure was gone, vanished without a trace. Was it ever really there? I forced a smile, still shaking. "Yeah, I'm fine," I said, my voice unsteady. "Just a little tired. I think I should go." I didn't wait for Tom to respond. I dropped the box I was holding and started for the stairs, moving faster than I should have. Tom called after me, but I didn't care. My body was moving on autopilot, driven by fear. I burst through the front door, slamming it behind me. I could still hear Tom's voice calling out, but I didn't stop. I rushed to my car, checked the back seat, and drove off without a single look back. I never contacted Tom again, and for weeks after that I couldn't shake the image of that thing in the basement, watching me. What had it been? Was it Tom's strange roommate? Or had I stumbled into something darker than I had realized? Even now, I don't take Craigslist jobs anymore. That experience taught me a valuable lesson about trust. Some people and some houses are not what they seem. Story 8, The Disappearing Tenant. It was the kind of situation you always hear about in urban legends, but you never really expect to happen to you. At least, that's what I thought until it did. I was looking for a roommate. I just moved to a new city for a job, and the rent was high, way higher than I'd anticipated. I'd found a small 2-bedroom apartment in a decent area, but it was barely affordable on my own. I knew I couldn't keep up with the rent unless I got someone to split it with me. So I did what everyone does in a pinch. I went to Craigslist. I posted a simple ad offering the second bedroom for rent. Nothing too fancy, just a few details about the room, the apartment, and the price. I was expecting to get a few messages, but honestly, I wasn't prepared for the weirdness that followed. The first few responses were normal, mostly people asking about the details of the place, the neighborhood, how much rent would be. But then I got a message from someone named Kyle. He introduced himself as a 28-year-old guy, recently moving into the area from a nearby city for work. His message was polite, asking if the room was still available, and saying he was looking for a quiet, respectful living arrangement. I asked a few questions, and his responses seemed fine. He wasn't demanding, wasn't too pushy, just seemed like a regular guy. He asked if he could come by to check out the place, and I agreed. We set a date for the following evening. When Kyle arrived, I was immediately struck by how clean-cut he was. He looked like he belonged in a business suit, but instead, he was dressed in a casual shirt and jeans. He was friendly, easygoing, and didn't seem at all like the type of person who would cause any trouble. We toured the apartment, and he seemed impressed. He asked a few more questions about the neighborhood, the apartment complex, and the other tenants, but nothing that raised any red flags. "Yeah, this looks perfect," Kyle said with a smile as he surveyed the room. "I think I'm going to take it." Great, I thought. We agreed on the rent, and he told me he could move in within the next couple of days. That was the first mistake. I didn't ask for references. I didn't ask for a security deposit up front. I just wanted someone to move in quickly so I could split the rent, and Kyle seemed like the perfect person to do that. The idea of moving in with a stranger was always a little unsettling, but at the time, I didn't have the luxury of being picky. He moved in 2 days later, bringing only a couple of duffel bags and a small suitcase. That should have been my second red flag. Who moves into a 2-bedroom apartment with that little luggage? The first few days went fine. Kyle kept to himself, and I didn't think anything of it. He worked long hours, always leaving early in the morning and coming home late at night. He'd eat dinner in his room, not really interacting with me unless we happened to cross paths in the kitchen. It was exactly the kind of arrangement I had imagined. But then things started getting off. It was subtle at first. A few things would go missing, like a bottle of shampoo from the bathroom or a snack I had left on the counter. Little things that could have been explained away as forgetfulness or a mistake. But after a while, I started noticing that Kyle's behavior was becoming more erratic. He started acting like he was always in the apartment. I'd wake up in the morning to find his shoes in the hallway, even though I hadn't heard him leave. And sometimes, I'd come home to find his bedroom door wide open, even though I was sure I had heard him leave the apartment earlier in the day. But the real weirdness began on the 4th night. I had just finished a late shift at work and was walking back to the apartment. The hallway was dark, and the lights flickered a bit as I made my way to the door. I got inside and immediately noticed that the apartment felt off. The air was thick, like it had been stale for hours. I figured maybe Kyle was home and had the place closed up tight. I called out, but there was no answer. I walked through the living room and down the hallway to his bedroom door. It was closed, but the weird thing was that there was a light on inside his room. I knocked softly, but when there was no response, I opened the door. And that's when I saw it. His room was completely empty. The bed was unmade. His things were gone, and his suitcase was nowhere to be found. The entire room was cleared out, except for a single, empty chair in the corner. I stood there, staring at the room for a full minute, trying to process what I was seeing. There were no signs of struggle or damage to the room. It looked like Kyle had just packed up and left. I immediately called him, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I texted him, but no reply. I didn't know what to do. I checked my lease agreement, and sure enough, Kyle had not left any kind of notice that he was moving out. A part of me wanted to go to the building manager, but the other part of me just wanted to let it go. He'd paid his rent, so I wasn't legally obligated to do anything. But the longer I thought about it, the weirder it seemed. The next day, I decided to stop by the leasing office and see if they had any idea where Kyle went. The manager was sitting behind the desk when I walked in, and he didn't even look up from his computer. "Hi," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I'm wondering if you can tell me if anyone's heard from Kyle. My roommate, he moved in last week, and now his room's empty. He's not answering my texts or calls." The manager paused, still not looking up, before finally responding. "Kyle, we don't have any Kyle listed on the lease. Let me check the system." I felt my stomach drop. "Yeah, there's no record of a Kyle ever signing a lease here," the manager continued, still typing away. "Are you sure you didn't just rent the room out under the table?" I felt the blood rush from my face. I don't know. I thought he was a legit tenant." "Well, the thing is," the manager continued, glancing up at me, "we've had people like him before. They sign on, they're quiet for a while, then they disappear without a trace. It's happened before. Never a good sign. You're lucky nothing worse happened." I left the office in a daze, trying to wrap my mind around what had just happened. There were so many questions left unanswered. Had Kyle been a squatter? Had he been using a fake name? Why had he pretended to be someone he was? A few days later, I received a strange package in the mail. It was addressed to me, but there was no return address. Inside, there was a single, torn-up piece of paper. On it, in scrawled handwriting, were the words, "I was never here." I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something dangerous. Had Kyle been pretending to be someone else all along? Or was he simply running from something? Either way, I wasn't sticking around to find out. I started looking for another apartment the very next day. As much as I hated the thought of moving again, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been living with someone who wasn't quite who they seemed. And to this day, I still have no idea who Kyle really was or what he wanted. But I know one thing. Craigslist was the last place I ever looked for a roommate again. Story 9. The free furniture that turned into a nightmare. You'd think I would have learned my lesson after the first few bizarre Craigslist encounters. But that didn't stop me from finding myself caught up in another one. A situation that, in hindsight, was more terrifying than I'd ever imagined. I had recently moved into a new apartment, and like most people on a budget, I was hoping to furnish it without breaking the bank. After a few weeks of scouring furniture stores and second-hand shops, I decided to turn to Craigslist. There I found a listing that seemed too good to be true. Free. Modern couch and coffee table. Moving and need to get rid of them. First come, first served. It sounded simple enough, and the pictures looked great. The couch was a sleek, dark gray sectional, and the coffee table was low and minimalistic, perfect for my living room. No strings attached, just free stuff, which was exactly what I needed. The post was written in a clear, casual tone, which made it sound even more legitimate. So I messaged the person right away, asking if the items were still available. Within a couple of minutes, I got a reply from someone named Ethan. He seemed friendly enough, and he mentioned that the couch and table were sitting in his garage, ready to be picked up. He gave me his address and said he was available for the pickup that evening. I felt a little wary, but I pushed the thought aside. What's the worst that could happen? It was a public place, and he was just giving away furniture after all. So I grabbed my car keys and set out for the pickup. When I arrived, the neighborhood was a bit quieter than I'd expected. The houses were large and well-maintained, but there weren't many people walking around. It was a little after 6:00 p.m., and the sky was already darkening, with the streetlights flickering on one by one. Ethan had mentioned he'd be home, so I wasn't expecting anything strange. The house itself was grand, maybe a little too grand for someone giving away furniture. I parked in the driveway and rang the doorbell. After a brief moment, the door opened, and a man in his late 30s greeted me. He was tall, with a shaggy beard and deep-set eyes. His appearance wasn't exactly alarming, but there was something about him that gave me pause, an odd vibe, like he wasn't completely present. "Hey, thanks for coming by. Ethan said, smiling a little too widely. The couch is just in the garage. I'll show you. I followed him down the side of the house to the garage, where I could see the couch and coffee table sitting near the back. The items were in good condition, exactly as pictured. I started to feel relieved, thinking that maybe I had lucked out with this Craigslist find. "So where are you moving to?" I asked, trying to make small talk while I inspected the couch. Ethan didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked over to the couch, crouching down to adjust one of the cushions. "Oh, just upstate. I got a new job and the commute is going to be rough. But you know, change is good." His voice was flat and I couldn't help but notice how strange it sounded, almost like he wasn't really speaking to me but to himself. I nodded, thinking it was a little odd but didn't say anything. "Well, I appreciate it," I said, already thinking about how I'd get the couch into my car. "I'll grab some movers tomorrow, but it looks like a great fit for my place." Ethan stood up and turned toward me with a smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. I was actually thinking, it'd be good to get the couch out tonight. You know, just so I don't have to deal with it for much longer. You could take it now, right? There was something in his tone that didn't sit right. It sounded like a demand rather than a request, and I felt a slight twinge of discomfort. "I mean, I didn't bring a truck. I only have my car. Maybe I could come back tomorrow," I suggested. Ethan's smile faded a little. "Nah, it's fine. I'll help you get it in your car. I'm not doing anything right now." He moved quickly toward the couch, lifting one end, and without another word, gestured for me to grab the other side. I was hesitant, but I agreed, figuring it would only take a minute. We managed to get the couch into my car with some difficulty, but as we stood there for a moment, Ethan looked at me with an intensity that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "You're going to love it, you know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's a great couch for someone like you." I didn't quite understand what he meant by that, but before I could question it, he started to walk back toward the house. "I'll just grab the coffee table," he called, and disappeared into the garage. I stood there for a second, uneasy. Something about Ethan's demeanor was off, but I didn't want to seem paranoid. Maybe he was just an eccentric guy trying to get rid of some furniture quickly. I climbed into the driver's seat, locking the doors behind me. But just as I was about to drive away, I saw something that made my heart drop. Through the side window of Ethan's garage, I noticed a row of large cardboard boxes stacked up neatly. Nothing strange about that, except for one thing. They weren't empty. There were faces peering out of some of the boxes, distorted and contorted into expressions of terror. I froze. I wasn't sure what I was looking at. Were these just old photos, or was there something more sinister going on? Before I could make sense of it, Ethan reappeared with the coffee table and placed it in the back of my car. He didn't seem to notice that I was staring at the boxes, his face as calm as ever. "All right, all set," he said, smiling again. "Drive safe." I nodded, my stomach churning. I quickly started the car and drove off, not looking back. But as I turned onto the main road, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror. Was he watching me? Was he following me? By the time I got home, I had convinced myself that I was just overthinking things. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe those boxes had just been filled with old clothes or something. But then I opened my trunk. The couch and coffee table were still there, but the moment I opened the back seat, I noticed something strange. It was a piece of paper. I picked it up, unfolding it to find a short message scrawled across it. "You took the bait. Now you'll pay the price." My heart sank. I didn't know what to make of it, but I was suddenly sure that I had made a grave mistake. I didn't sleep well that night. Every creak, every sound outside my apartment made me jump. I kept the lights on and locked the doors, clutching my phone close, ready to dial for help if I needed to. But nothing happened. The next day, I decided to take action. I called the police, but they didn't take me seriously. I explained the message I had found, but they dismissed it as some sort of prank. Weeks passed and nothing more happened. No strange encounters, no phone calls, no follow-up from Ethan. But every time I saw a Craigslist ad or a free listing, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of dread. I had narrowly escaped something, and I didn't know exactly what. But that's the thing about Craigslist. Sometimes, the deals that seem too good to be true really are. Story 10. The Roommate Who Didn't Belong. Craigslist has always been a quick go-to for me whenever I'm in need of something, whether it's a couch, a lamp, or in this case, a roommate. I had just moved to the city for a new job and the rent was higher than I had expected. To make things work, I decided to rent out the extra room in my apartment. I posted an ad, keeping it simple, looking for someone clean, respectful, and reliable. Within a few hours, I received a message from a guy named Jason. He seemed like a decent guy, mid-20s, a little quiet but polite in his messages. His photo showed him with short hair and a casual smile. He said he was moving to the area for work and needed a place immediately. He seemed eager, which I thought was a good sign, considering the housing market at the time. We agreed to meet the next day at the apartment, and when he arrived, I was slightly surprised by his appearance. He was a little scruffier than I had expected, but not in a bad way, just a bit disheveled. He wore a hoodie, dark jeans, and sneakers, and his eyes seemed tired, like he hadn't been getting much sleep. We sat down in the living room, and he quickly assured me that he was easygoing and would pay rent on time. "Don't worry, I'm low maintenance," he told me, his voice calm, but a little too monotone for my liking. There was something strange about the way he said it, like he was trying too hard to sell the idea of being easy to live with. After a short conversation, I agreed to rent him the room. He moved in a few days later, and at first everything seemed fine. Jason kept to himself mostly, occasionally coming out to watch TV or eat something in the kitchen. I didn't mind. I liked my privacy, and he seemed respectful of that. But as the days passed, I began to notice some oddities. First, Jason had a habit of talking to himself, loudly. I could hear him in his room at all hours of the night, muttering, almost like he was having conversations with someone invisible. I'd chalked it up to stress or anxiety at first, thinking he might be dealing with work or personal issues, but it continued. One night, I heard him say something that sent a shiver down my spine. "You won't find me, but I'm right here, always here." It was spoken in a low whisper, but enough for me to hear through the walls. I didn't know what to make of it, so I decided to ignore it. Maybe it was just a quirk of his. But then things started to escalate. One evening, I came home later than usual from work and noticed something strange. The front door, which I always made sure to lock, was slightly ajar. I immediately felt uneasy, but I chalked it up to the possibility that I had forgotten to fully close it. I entered the apartment cautiously, calling out for Jason. There was no answer. I walked into the living room, but he wasn't there either. Then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. On the coffee table was my phone, my personal phone, which I kept on a charger in my bedroom. I froze, realizing that not only had my door been left open, but my phone had been moved. I wasn't sure if I should confront him, or if I should just leave the apartment and never come back. But I didn't want to overreact. Maybe he had been trying to be helpful and plugged my phone in, though I couldn't fathom why he would have gone into my room in the first place. Jason didn't show up that night, and I spent the entire evening pacing, trying to rationalize what had happened. The next morning, I confronted him. He apologized profusely, claiming he had no idea why the door was left open and that he had found my phone on the counter and just plugged it in for me. I wanted to believe him, but something about it felt wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it. It was the way he kept avoiding eye contact when we spoke, like he was hiding something. Days passed, and it seemed like Jason was trying to be more normal, but the weirdness didn't stop. He started becoming increasingly secretive, spending hours in his room, not coming out even for meals. And when he did, his face looked pale, almost sickly. I couldn't help but feel like he was hiding something from me. The last straw came when I returned home one night to find my front door once again ajar. This time, it wasn't just the door. It was the smell in the air that sent alarm bells ringing in my head. It was a mixture of something sour and metallic. I checked the kitchen, but everything seemed normal. My breath hitched when I noticed the faintest smear of something dark red on the carpet in the hallway. At first I thought it was paint, but then I saw it again on the wall by his door. It was too dark, too red to be paint. My heart pounded in my chest. I knocked on Jason's door, no answer. I knocked again, harder this time, my pulse quickening. Still nothing. My mind raced. Could something have happened to him? Maybe he was injured, or I shoved the thoughts away, trying to remain calm. I quickly called the police and waited, terrified that I might find something horrible waiting behind that door. When the officers arrived, they made their way inside without hesitation. I stayed close behind them, watching as they knocked on Jason's door again. When he finally answered, he was visibly shaken, his hands trembling. His eyes were wide, and his posture was hunched as if he were trying to make himself seem smaller, less noticeable. "Everything okay, Jason?" one of the officers asked, his tone professional but firm. Jason nodded quickly, but he didn't say anything. The officers asked to look around, and to my horror, Jason didn't object. They found nothing immediately in his room, but when they checked his closet, they uncovered something horrifying. Pictures. Pictures of me. Hundreds of them. Some of them taken through the windows at night, others showing me sleeping on the couch or moving around the apartment when I thought I was alone. "Why do you have all these pictures?" one of the officers asked him. Jason just stared, mouth slightly open. He looked like he wanted to say something but couldn't. He was sweating profusely now, his face ashen. The officer stepped closer to him, repeating the question. And finally, Jason muttered, "I didn't mean to, I wanted to be close to her. I thought if I could watch her, we'd be together." The officers immediately handcuffed him and led him out of the apartment. The whole time, Jason didn't resist. He didn't make a sound. In the weeks that followed, I learned the full extent of his obsession. Jason had been stalking me long before he ever became my roommate. He had even gone so far as to set up hidden cameras throughout the apartment when I wasn't around. His plan was to stay in the apartment long enough to win me over by getting closer, but his mental state had deteriorated as time went on. I moved out shortly after the incident, and I've been living in a much safer place ever since. But the images and memories of what happened still haunt me. I can't help but wonder, what would have happened if I had ignored the signs, if I hadn't called the police? Craigslist may be a great place to find deals, but it can also be a place where something far more sinister lurks just beneath the surface. Story 11. The free sofa that almost took my life. I had just moved into a new apartment and was eager to furnish it without breaking the bank. My budget was tight, and I wasn't about to splurge on a brand new couch when I could find something perfectly fine on Craigslist. After a few weeks of searching, I came across an ad that seemed too good to be true. A nearly new leather sofa for free. All I had to do was pick it up. The ad described the couch as a modern leather sofa in excellent condition, barely used, free to a good home. It included a photo, and everything looked perfect. A sleek black sofa that would fit perfectly in my living room. The seller's name was Chris, and the contact number was a local area code. I messaged him right away, eager to claim the couch. He responded quickly and told me he lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood about 30 minutes away from my place. He said the couch was already packed up, and I just needed to come pick it up. "Come by any time today, I'll be home. Just text me when you're on your way," he wrote. I didn't think twice. Free furniture. It sounded perfect. I set out immediately after work, excited to get the new couch home and finally have a comfortable place to sit. The drive to the neighborhood felt a little long, but it was a peaceful, quiet area. Suburban houses lined up with manicured lawns, all the homes looking almost identical in their well-kept appearances. When I arrived at the address, I wasn't sure what to expect. The house was one of those older two-story homes, but it seemed to be well maintained. There was a large front porch with a hanging plant and a garden that could have used a little weeding. It wasn't the nicest house in the neighborhood, but it wasn't run down either. I parked in front, and after texting Chris to let him know I was there, I waited a minute or two before he replied with a "come on in." He gave me the code to the side gate, and I walked down the narrow path to the backyard, as he had instructed. The backyard was surprisingly spacious, and there was a large sliding door leading into the house. I noticed the door was slightly ajar. As I approached, I heard what sounded like someone moving furniture inside, and I assumed it was Chris, getting the couch ready for me. I knocked lightly on the door and called out, "Hey, it's the guy from Craigslist for the sofa." A moment later, the door opened, and a man in his late 30s stood before me. He looked ordinary enough, average height, unkempt brown hair, a little scruffy but nothing alarming. He smiled and said, "Hey, glad you made it. Let me show you the couch." As I stepped into the living room, my stomach churned. The space felt off. The walls were bare, with no pictures or decorations, and the furniture was sparse. The entire house had a strange, almost sterile feeling to it, but it wasn't enough to set off any major red flags, at least not at first. He led me to a corner of the room where the leather sofa was sitting, perfectly intact, just as promised. I nodded, impressed by the condition of it. "Looks great," I said, trying to mask my unease. Chris smiled but seemed a little too eager. "You can just take it now if you'd like. I'll help you load it." That's when I noticed something odd. The front door was locked, and I could see the hallway leading to the rest of the house. There were no pictures on the walls, no signs of personal belongings like no family photos, no books, no knickknacks. The entire house felt empty. It was like no one had actually lived there. I asked, trying to make small talk, "So, are you moving out of state?" "Oh no," Chris replied, his voice too quick, his eyes darting away. "Just, changing things up. The couch is the last thing I need to get rid of. I don't have much else in here." His answer didn't quite add up, but I pushed it aside, telling myself I was just being paranoid. After all, I was getting a free couch. Chris and I carried the sofa out to my car. He was surprisingly strong for a guy who seemed to be in his 30s, and the sofa was heavier than I expected. I didn't mind, though. It was a good workout. As we loaded it into the back of my truck, I glanced over at the house again. The curtains were drawn on every window, and there was no sign of movement inside. The yard looked a little too perfect, too still. I shook off the feeling of unease and thanked Chris. "This is perfect. Thanks again." "No problem," he said, smiling wider now, almost as if he was glad to see me go. I drove off, still feeling that nagging discomfort in the pit of my stomach. As I got closer to home, I checked the rearview mirror once or twice, noticing something strange. The house I had just left, the one with the strange, quiet backyard, there were no lights on. The entire place looked dark, like it was abandoned, even though Chris had been there just moments ago. When I arrived home and unloaded the couch, I went to grab my phone to text Chris and thank him. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There was an email in my inbox. The subject read, "Glad you took it." I opened it, and there was a short message. "Hope you enjoy it. The couch looks great in your place. Don't worry, I'll be back soon to check in." I froze. How did he get my email address? I had never given it to him, and I hadn't shared my personal information with him in any way. Just a first-name exchange, no phone number, no email. How could he know about my address, my life? My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a message from a number I didn't recognize. "It's Chris. I hope you like the couch. Don't forget, don't lock the door tonight. It's no good when you lock up." I stared at the message, feeling the blood drain from my face. My hands shook as I locked the phone and shoved it into my pocket. I quickly checked all the doors and windows in the apartment, making sure everything was secure. But deep down, I knew Chris knew where I lived. The next day, I did something I should have done from the start. I called the police. I explained everything. The ad, the strange interactions, the odd behavior, and the unsettling messages. The officer on the other end said they'd keep an eye out for anyone matching his description. Days went by and nothing else happened. I thought maybe I had overreacted, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, waiting for the right moment. Weeks passed and I received no more messages. I thought I was free, but that wasn't the case. One morning I came home from work to find my door ajar again. I stepped into the apartment, expecting to find my things gone or worse, a stranger lurking inside. But instead, there was only a note on my coffee table. "Enjoy the couch. I'll be back. It's all about the memories." It was written in messy, hurried handwriting, and it sent a chill down my spine. After that, I moved out. I never heard from Chris again, but I learned my lesson. Some free things come at a higher cost than you could ever imagine. Story 12. The disappearing ad that almost got me killed. I had just finished a tough semester in college, and I was looking for a way to relax and reward myself. My car was old and had been giving me trouble for a while. I wasn't looking to buy a new one, but maybe I could find something used, a solid deal that wouldn't cost me much. Craigslist was the obvious place to search. I started browsing the listings, scrolling through the cars. Most were overpriced or too far away, but then I saw it. A listing for a 2006 Toyota Corolla in great condition for only $1,500. The post had a picture of the car and it looked perfect, clean, shiny, and ready to go. The ad was only a day old and it seemed like a dream come true. I sent a message right away, asking if it was still available. The reply came quickly. The seller, who went by the name Tom, said the car was indeed available and that I could meet him in a nearby parking lot to check it out. He told me that he needed to sell it quickly because he was relocating and he would accept cash. He also said he'd been through a lot recently and this was his last car. He gave me the address of a parking lot near a quiet part of town. I agreed to meet up, eager to see the car for myself. That evening I drove to the location. It was around 7:30 p.m. and the sun had just dipped below the horizon. The parking lot wasn't too busy and it looked a bit sketchy. It was a large, empty space near an industrial park with only a few cars scattered across it. I parked near the corner, texting Tom to let him know I had arrived. A few minutes later, a white van pulled up across from me. A man in his 40s stepped out. He was wearing a t-shirt, jeans, and had a tired look about him. He didn't smile or wave, just approached my car directly. "Are you here for the Corolla?" he asked, his voice a bit gruff. I nodded, a little uneasy but trying to push the feeling aside. Tom led me to the car, which was parked a few spaces away. The car was in pristine condition, just like the photos. No scratches, no dents. Everything looked great. Tom told me it had been well taken care of and that it ran perfectly. I leaned in to check the interior and noticed that the car smelled a bit odd, like something musty and stale. I didn't let it bother me too much. I was still excited about the deal. I asked Tom if I could take it for a quick test drive, and he said that would be fine. We got into the car and he drove me around the block. Everything seemed fine, but the air inside felt thick, almost suffocating. I kept my windows cracked to get some air, but I tried to focus on the car's performance instead. After the short drive, we returned to the parking lot. Tom seemed more eager now, almost too eager, as if he was rushing to get rid of the car. "I'll take $1,300, he said. "You can pay me now and I'll sign everything over to you. I just need to get out of here." I hesitated. Something wasn't right, but I had been so focused on getting a deal that I didn't want to back out now. The car was perfect, and at that price I couldn't resist. I told him I'd pay the full $1,500, but I needed to run to an ATM. He said that was fine, but he asked if I could leave the car in the lot while I went to withdraw the money. That's when I started feeling really uneasy. Why would he want to keep the car there? I told him I'd just take it with me to the ATM and come back afterward. He agreed reluctantly and told me to park it near a particular spot in the lot. I followed his instructions and drove the car to the spot, but as I turned around to get back in my own car, I noticed something strange. Tom was standing by the van, watching me. It wasn't a casual glance either. He was staring, his eyes cold and calculating. I could feel my heart rate pick up as I got into my car and started driving away. I kept looking in my rearview mirror to see if he was following me, but there was nothing. Just the dark, quiet streets stretching behind me. I tried to calm myself down, but the strange feeling didn't fade. When I got to the ATM, I couldn't stop thinking about Tom. Why had he wanted to keep the car in the lot? Why had he insisted I leave it there? The more I thought about it, the more I realized something was off. After withdrawing the cash, I called my friend, let's call him Mark, who had some experience with cars. I told him everything and asked for his advice. Mark told me I was probably overthinking things, but he did suggest I have a mechanic take a look at the car first. It seemed like the smart thing to do, so I agreed. I drove back to the parking lot to meet Tom, but when I arrived, the lot was empty. Tom's van was gone and the Corolla was parked in the exact spot I had left it. I texted Tom to let him know I was back and ready to make the transaction, but he didn't respond. Minutes passed and I tried calling. No answer. Then out of nowhere, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Tom. Don't take the car, go home. It was cryptic and strange. I tried calling again, but this time my call went straight to voicemail. I got a bad feeling in my gut. Why was he telling me to go home? Was I being set up? I decided to leave the lot and drive back toward my apartment, but as I was making my way down the street, I caught a glimpse of something in my rearview mirror. A white van was following me. The same white van. My stomach dropped as I realized it was Tom. I made a quick decision. I turned down a side street and started weaving through residential areas, hoping to lose him. I could see his headlights in my rearview mirror, always staying a few car lengths behind me. It wasn't tailgating, but it was deliberate. For the next few minutes, I kept my eyes glued to the mirror, checking for any sign of a tail. I couldn't lose him. Every time I turned, he followed. I kept checking my phone, hoping to reach someone, but there was no service in these neighborhoods. I was trapped. My mind raced as I formulated a plan. I remembered Mark's advice, go to a police station. I wasn't far from one, so I decided to make my way there, hoping that Tom would back off once he saw it. I drove to the station, but Tom was still on my tail, staying a few car lengths behind. I pulled into the parking lot slowly, not wanting to alert him. When I stopped in front of the building, I glanced at my rearview mirror again. Tom made a hard right turn and drove past the station, speeding off in the opposite direction. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My hands were shaking as I turned off the engine. For a few minutes, I sat there just staring ahead, processing what had happened. It took me a while to shake off the lingering sense of unease. What had Tom wanted? Why had he been following me? I never did hear from him again, and the car listing was deleted within hours. In the following days, I thought a lot about how close I came to something far worse. There were 1,000 possibilities running through my mind. Maybe he was trying to scare me, maybe he wanted to rob me, or maybe he was planning something even darker. But I'd learned my lesson. No matter how good the deal sounds, some things are too good to be true. And sometimes, a Craigslist ad can almost cost you your life. Story 13. The roommate who wasn't what he seemed. I had just moved into my first apartment in the city, a small but cozy place with enough space to start fresh. My old place had been with my family, but now that I was on my own, I needed to save a little money. So, when I saw an ad on Craigslist for a roommate, I thought it was the perfect opportunity. The ad was simple: room for rent in a quiet, spacious apartment, $500 month, close to downtown. Contact John for more details. The photos showed a bright living room, a decent-sized kitchen, and a shared bathroom. The place seemed nice enough, so I messaged the poster, asking if the room was still available. John replied almost immediately. He was polite, friendly even, and said he was looking for someone reliable and respectful. He also mentioned that he worked from home and preferred a quieter living situation, which was perfect for me. We agreed to meet, and he gave me the address. It was in a nice, quiet neighborhood not too far from my work. When I arrived, the apartment was exactly as it had looked in the photos, clean, bright, and spacious. John was there to greet me, and he seemed normal. He was in his early 30s, tall, a bit lanky, with short brown hair and a friendly smile. He showed me the room, which was decent. The apartment was older but well kept, and the furniture was comfortable enough. He explained that he had been living there for a few years and just wanted to find someone who would respect the place. I was excited about the prospect of having my own space in a city I was just getting to know. John seemed harmless, so I agreed to move in that same week. The first few days went well. We kept to ourselves mostly. He worked from home, which meant we were both around most of the time, but he stayed in his room during the day, and I did my own thing. He was friendly enough when we did talk, but there was a quiet intensity about him, something that made me feel like he was always watching, always analyzing. It was a little strange, but I didn't think much of it at first. I was happy to have a place to stay, but after a few weeks, I began to notice some odd things. The first thing was the constant knocking. It happened late at night, sometimes as late as 1 or 2 in the morning. At first, I thought it was just the sound of John getting up to get something from the kitchen. But then it started to happen more often, 3, 4 times a week. I would hear knocks on my door, soft but persistent, almost like he was testing whether I was asleep. I tried to brush it off as nothing. Maybe he was just anxious or had some sort of routine, but then it got worse. One evening, I was sitting on the couch, reading a book, when John came out of his room. He didn't say anything to me, just walked past me and into the kitchen. That was odd because usually he would at least make small talk when he was in the room with me. But this time, he didn't even glance in my direction. I didn't think much of it until later that night. I went to bed around 11 p.m., and just as I was about to fall asleep, I heard a soft creaking noise coming from the hallway outside my room. It was faint but distinct. I sat up, trying to figure out what it was. The creaking stopped, but a few moments later I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate. I got up to check, thinking maybe it was just John getting something from the kitchen. But when I opened the door, no one was there. I looked down the hallway and saw the dim light from his room, the door slightly ajar. It looked normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Over the next few days, things only got stranger. John started to leave strange notes around the apartment. At first, it was just little things like "please clean up after yourself" or "don't forget to lock the door." But soon they became more personal. He started leaving notes on my desk, in the bathroom, even on the kitchen table. "Hope you're doing well today. Don't forget to take a break. You should get some fresh air. The weather's nice." The notes didn't seem harmful at first. I chalked them up to him being overly considerate or a little socially awkward. But it was when I found one in my room, tucked under my pillow, that I started to feel uneasy. The note read, "I know you've been feeling down lately. Let me know if you need someone to talk to. I'm here for you." It was unsettling, to say the least. How did he know I was feeling down? I hadn't told him anything personal about myself. I kept to myself, focused on my work and the occasional interaction with him when we were both in the apartment. I decided to confront him about it. I waited until the next evening when he was home, sitting in the living room, watching TV. "Hey, John, I need to ask you something," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. He turned to me, his expression neutral but attentive. "Sure, what's up?" "Why have you been leaving these notes around?" I asked, holding up the one from my room. His face froze for a moment, like he didn't expect me to find them. Then he smiled, a little too wide, and said, "Oh, I just thought it would be nice to check in. You seem like you've been stressed out lately. You haven't been sleeping well, have you?" My stomach dropped. I didn't tell him I wasn't sleeping well. I didn't tell him anything about how I'd been feeling. How did he know? I'm just trying to be a good roommate, he continued, his voice soft, almost too soft. We're in this together, right? I didn't know how to respond. My mind was racing, but I tried to stay calm. I nodded quickly and muttered something about being fine. I didn't want to make things uncomfortable, but I couldn't ignore that feeling in my gut that told me something wasn't right. That night as I lay in bed, I heard the creaking noise again. This time it was closer, much closer. I held my breath, straining to listen. The footsteps came again, slow and deliberate. They stopped just outside my room, and I could hear the faint sound of breathing. I waited, heart pounding in my chest. The door to my room was closed, and I didn't want to make any noise. But then I heard a soft whisper, as if someone was talking to themselves. The words were too muffled to make out, but I knew one thing for sure. It was coming from outside my door. I stayed still, terrified, as the minutes ticked by. Finally, the sound faded and I dared to peek outside. John's door was slightly open and there was no sign of him. I knew something had to be done. I couldn't keep living like this in constant fear, unsure of what was happening in the apartment. I decided to install a camera in the hallway. I didn't tell John. Of course he would have suspected something. Over the next few days, I reviewed the footage, expecting to see him walking past my door or maybe stopping outside for a few moments. But what I saw was far worse. John had been coming into my room while I was asleep. He'd been standing over my bed, watching me. It wasn't a few seconds either. He'd stayed there for minutes, just staring at me, not moving. I packed my things that night and left. I didn't want to wait to confront him. I didn't want to know what he'd do if I did. The next day, I called the landlord and told them everything, though I wasn't sure how much they could do. I didn't stay for the police to investigate either. I couldn't afford the time. As for John, I never heard from him again. The listing for the apartment was taken down, and I later found out he had been renting it under a false name. I never learned the truth about him, but I know one thing. I'll never take the risk of living with someone off Craigslist again. Some people don't just want a place to stay. They want to invade your life in ways you'll never see coming.